Now we will move on to the next section, where I outline my proposal for reforming the banking system based on a series of principles that by now should be perfectly clear and obvious to all the students in this course. If we wish to eradicate the errors committed in Peel's Bank Act and to redesign the financial system to prevent from now on the recurrent stages of artificial boom and bust, widespread malinvestment of resources, and finally financial crisis and deep economic recession, which have been devastating the poorly named free market economies, which are no such thing, for nearly 2 centuries, we must adopt the following 3 measures. First, the privatization of money. The state has expropriated our money, and what we must do is remove the state from this area, so that money, like all other goods, will be subject to the general legal principles which shape and make possible a free market economy. This means repealing the legal tender regulations that oblige everyone to accept as a liberatory means of payment the fiduciary currency issued by public authorities. Therefore, all legal tender laws should be abolished, so that in every contract economic agents enter into, they are free to reach an agreement on which monetary unit they will use as a medium of payment. This would require the privatization of money. Public companies have been privatized. The communist economies of the former Eastern Bloc have been privatized. And with the fall of the Berlin Wall behind us, what we still have to do is to privatize money. Now, money cannot be privatized in a vacuum. We have already discussed Mises's monetary regression theorem. It tells us that economic agents can use a monetary unit only by relying on their experience of its purchasing power yesterday. We cannot jump to a totally new monetary system. It is beyond our capacity. In fact, the transition to the euro was possible in Spain because an exchange rate with the peseta was established, and we were all able to make our purchasing power calculations. So, what I am proposing is simply an exchange of state-issued money for the form of private money that was chosen for centuries, throughout human history, namely gold. I propose we go back to that point in history when our private money was expropriated and forcibly replaced with public money, and gold disappeared as a monetary standard. I propose we privatize money, replace it with gold, and leave it to economic agents to decide at any particular time, because this is an evolutionary matter, whether or not gold will continue to be the most commonly and generally accepted medium of exchange. So we should privatize money in its current form, replace it with its metallic equivalent in gold, and allow the market to resume its free development from the time of the transition, and either confirm gold as the generally accepted form of money, or permit the spontaneous and gradual entrance of other monetary standards. We cannot know how the future will unfold, though we do have valuable knowledge and experience of what has happened in the past, and this provides us with considerable peace of mind, and enables us to conceive a transition like the one described, without any expectation of traumatic consequences. So, the first measure would be the privatization of money. Second, we must reintroduce a system of complete banking freedom. This would mean eliminating central banks, and in general, any government agency devoted to monitoring or intervening in the financial market. It should be possible to set up banking firms with complete freedom in terms of corporate purpose, legal form, and operation, as is logical. However, such firms could operate solely and exclusively within the framework of the substantive, civil, commercial, and criminal laws to which all other economic agents who act in a free society are subject. Thus, in the specific area of banking, this measure would require that private banks be completely free, though logically that they operate with a 100% reserve requirement on the demand deposits and their equivalents, which they receive from their customers. I will not elaborate further on this point now, because we have already discussed and analyzed it from many diverse perspectives in this course. Now we come to the third part of the reform. All agents involved in the free banking system must be subject to traditional legal principles and guidelines, and these demand a 100% reserve ratio on demand deposits and their equivalents. And how can we visualize the financial and banking system of a totally free society that would rest on these three principles? Well, the truth is that until entrepreneurial knowledge is created in an environment of freedom, such a financial system is hard to imagine. However, there are many signs which can help to give us an idea of what such a financial and free banking system would be like. Basically, I believe it would consist of a large conglomeration of highly liquid mutual funds, in which people would make short, medium, and long-term investments. Owners of shares in these funds would have the right to sell them whenever they needed money, but obviously they would have no guarantee of receiving the nominal value initially invested. So, depending on changes in the market value of the shares over time, and on the economic circumstances at any given moment, the amount received would vary. Well, in contrast with this network of true financial intermediaries, there would be another network of companies completely unconnected with credit and financial intermediation. And these companies would engage in conceiving or carrying out a series of activities, such as the extraction of gold, in the case of a metal standard like gold, and the design and supply of the different forms of private money. These companies would have a profit margin, and could even provide cashier services, payments, bookkeeping, etc., and charge the corresponding market prices for these services. One step in the right direction toward the ideal model I have just described would be the famous Glass-Steagall Act. This banking act was passed following the Great Depression in the United States, and it divided the banking system into two large groups: commercial banks, which take demand deposits and can invest only in the short term by discounting bills, and investment banks, which mainly act as financial intermediaries, offer long-term loans, and finance industry. These two types of banks became completely separate from each other. Well, notice that though the Glass-Steagall Act appears to have been an arbitrary interventionist measure, it was a step in the right direction, an approach, though timid, to our ideal model of a banking system, in which intermediation, via mutual funds, is separate from the extraction of precious metals, and the supply of cashier services appropriate to companies which engage in money creation. In a nutshell, the ideal system is one in which the business of creating money is separate from the business of financial intermediation. And curiously, when I present this proposal, my supposedly libertarian colleagues of the Chicago School, etc., do not understand. And they say, "Come on, Jesus, you call yourself a libertarian, and here you are defending an interventionist measure like the famous Glass-Steagall Act." I always answer them in the same way. The ideal model is clear: the disappearance of the state and central banks, the privatization of currency, and the reintroduction of complete banking freedom, though banks would be subject to general legal principles, particularly a 100% reserve requirement. Until this ideal is achieved, and as long as there is a state, a central bank, and intervention, let us find a way to make its policy as harmless as possible. And clearly there must be regulation, so let us seek to make it as consistent with the free market as possible. Likewise, it would be absurd to say that everyone should do whatever he pleases in the streets. Instead, what a libertarian defends is the privatization of all the streets, and logically, the owners of a street, or the respective owners' association, would establish the regulations that would govern the street. That arrangement would not mean that everyone did exactly as he pleased in the streets. Nothing of the sort. Until the streets are private, if there must be regulation, it should resemble as closely as possible our conception of what the purely private management of the resource would be like. The problem is that we are in a sort of fog. We do not know exactly how resources would be entrepreneurially managed if they were private. But that is a far cry from saying that we are in a state of total ignorance. And certainly, if regulation is necessary, the closer it is to the market, the better. But we certainly cannot say, let everyone do as he pleases. That would be like arguing, are you a libertarian? Well, then you must be against public policing. Yes, I am against public policing. Well then, let us get rid of the police. No, I defend private law enforcement and policing through private security companies like Prosegur, etc. As long as circumstances are different and there is a monopolistic state police force, let us try to ensure that it operates as similarly as possible to the way it would operate in a network of companies that provide private law enforcement systems. The police should be as respectful as possible, law-abiding, efficient, etc. And if there must be regulation, it should be in accordance with that. I think that now you will all understand how this can easily be extrapolated to the financial sphere. As long as we have a central bank and a fractional reserve banking system, etc., clearly a law like the Glass-Steagall Act is regulation more in line with the free market and what it would establish if there were no central bank, currency were completely private, and economic agents adhered to a 100% reserve requirement. A law like the Glass-Steagall Act would separate commercial banking from investment banking and prevent something that has occurred in recent crises, that whenever credit expansion, which is generated by commercial banks and ultimately exerts a dramatic effect in the form of loans, since commercial banking is connected to investment banking. Whenever credit expansion leads entrepreneurs to commit investment errors on a massive scale, and the market uncovers those errors and begins to rectify them, the whole banking system is hit by a crisis, and the entire monetary system threatens to disappear, in part because these two types of banking business are not currently separate.